The story of law begins long before modern courtrooms and written constitutions. Nearly 4,000 years ago, on the banks of the Euphrates River, a king rose to power in Babylon whose name would echo through history, Hammurabi. His reign stretched from 1792 to 1750 BCE, during which he transformed a small Mesopotamian kingdom into a mighty empire. But Hammurabi's greatest legacy wasn't just military conquest or political alliances. It was his code of laws, etched in stone, that still survives today. Imagine standing in front of a towering black stele more than 7 feet tall, set up in a temple courtyard. At the top of this monument is a carved relief, Hammurabi himself, standing humbly before Shamash, the Mesopotamian sun god and god of justice. Shamash extends to the king a staff and a ring, symbols of authority. The message is clear. Hammurabi's power comes from the divine, and his laws are not merely the commands of a ruler, but the will of the gods themselves. Beneath that image, written in dense Akkadian cuneiform, are 282 laws, the Code of Hammurabi. The laws cover nearly every part of life: trade, contracts, marriage, inheritance, agriculture, crime, and punishment. They were not hidden in dusty archives, but set up in public spaces so that every Babylonian could see them. This was revolutionary. The law was not just for kings and priests, but for common people, who could point to the stone and say, "Here is justice." The code begins with a prologue in which Hammurabi declares why he has established these laws: to bring about righteousness in the land, to destroy the wicked, and to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. Already you can hear echoes of later scriptures. The Torah's book of Deuteronomy declares that God gave laws so that Israel may live and take possession of the land. The Quran proclaims that revelation was sent so that people may uphold justice. Across different traditions, the message is the same: law is more than rules, it is the foundation of moral order. But Hammurabi's code was not a gentle vision of justice. It was rooted in the principle we know today as an eye for an eye. If a man destroyed the eye of another man, his own eye would be destroyed. If he broke another man's bone, his own bone would be broken. Centuries later, the Torah's book of Exodus would echo the same principle: life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. The Quran too would confirm this ancient principle, saying that life is for life and eye for an eye. The similarity is striking, though Hammurabi's laws came nearly 1,000 years earlier. The punishments in Hammurabi's code varied by social class. If a nobleman struck another noble and killed him, the penalty might be death. But if he struck a commoner and killed him, the punishment was usually a fine. Slaves were treated even more harshly, considered property rather than persons. By today's standards, it feels deeply unjust. Yet for its time, the code was a remarkable attempt to standardize justice in a world where vengeance and tribal feuds often ruled. The laws also reveal the anxieties of an agrarian society. If a farmer rented land but failed to cultivate it, he was required to compensate the owner. If a canal broke because a man neglected his duties, he had to repair the damage and pay for the crops that were lost. These details give us a window into the daily life of Mesopotamia, where agriculture depended on carefully managed irrigation. Marriage and family were also heavily regulated. The code outlined dowries, inheritance rights, and penalties for adultery. In some cases, wives accused of unfaithfulness could be thrown into the river to test their innocence. Fathers had nearly absolute authority over their children. It might sound brutal, but in Hammurabi's time, these rules brought structure to family life, much as later religious texts would. Most chilling are the laws dealing with negligence. If a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner, the builder would be put to death. If it killed the owner's son, then the builder's son would be executed. To us, this feels barbaric. But to Babylonians, it was about accountability. Hammurabi wanted his subjects to know that negligence had consequences. Justice was not only about punishing criminals, but also about forcing everyone to act responsibly. Hammurabi crafted laws that claimed divine origin, promising protection for the weak and punishment for the guilty. Yet at the same time, those laws reflected the harsh realities of a stratified society, where the powerful often received lighter burdens than the powerless. Was this justice or propaganda carved in stone? That question would haunt future civilizations as they crafted their own codes, from Moses on Mount Sinai to Muhammad in the deserts of Arabia. The heart of Hammurabi's code was its striking detail. Law after law presents vivid scenes from Babylonian life. If a doctor performed surgery with a bronze knife and the patient died, the doctor's hand could be cut off. If a merchant failed to deliver grain he had promised, he would have to repay tenfold. If a shepherd let his flock graze in another man's field, he was liable for the damage. These rules were not abstract ideals. They were responses to real disputes in a bustling, complex society. One of the most famous laws dealt with oxen. If an ox gored a man to death, but the ox had never been violent before, the owner was not punished. But if the ox was known to gore and the owner failed to restrain it, then the owner was guilty of negligence. Centuries later, the Book of Exodus contains an almost identical law, showing how human societies faced the same practical problems and often came to the same conclusions. The Code of Hammurabi also reveals how Babylon understood responsibility. Builders, boatmen, and even innkeepers were held accountable for their work. If a boat sank because of poor construction, the boatman had to replace it. If a tavern owner failed to report criminals meeting in her establishment, she could be executed. These rules tell us that Babylon valued order, security, and economic stability, and punished those who threatened it. But Hammurabi's justice was not equal. The penalties shifted depending on whether the victim was an aristocrat, a commoner, or a slave. If a noble blinded another noble, he lost his own eye. If he blinded a commoner, he paid silver. If he blinded a slave, he paid the slave's owner half the slave's value. Justice was calibrated by status, not by universal principles. By contrast, later biblical texts declared that you shall have one law for the stranger and the citizen alike, marking a shift toward a more universal ideal. Collective punishment also appears in the code. If a house collapsed and killed the owner's son, the builder's son was executed in return. To us, this seems incomprehensible. The Torah would later forbid punishing children for their father's sins, emphasizing personal responsibility. But Hammurabi's Babylon still carried the echoes of tribal custom, where families bore responsibility for one another's actions. Another striking difference is religion. Hammurabi's laws deal almost entirely with civil and economic matters. There are no commandments about worship, sacrifice, or purity. In contrast, the Torah and the Quran intertwine civil law with divine command, uniting morality and ritual with justice. Hammurabi's code was secular in practice, but racked in divine imagery to legitimize his rule. Still, the parallels with later scriptures are undeniable. The principle of proportional justice, the concern for property rights, the protection of widows and orphans, all these themes resonate across the ages. It reminds us that human beings, whether in Babylon, Jerusalem, or Mecca, were wrestling with the same questions: how to live together, how to restrain violence, and how to protect the vulnerable. Hammurabi's empire did not last forever. After his death, Babylon weakened, and centuries later foreign kings carried off his monuments as trophies of war. The great stele of laws was seized by an Elamite conqueror and taken to the city of Susa, where it lay broken and buried for more than 2,000 years. When it was rediscovered in the early 20th century, the world was stunned. Here was a code older than the Ten Commandments, older than Roman law, inscribed with the voice of a king who claimed to bring justice by divine command. The discovery sparked debate. Did the laws of Moses borrow from Hammurabi? Were the similarities proof that biblical law was not unique? Some argued that Hammurabi's code showed how widespread written law already was in the ancient Near East, so it was no surprise that the Torah would contain similar principles. Others saw it as evidence of divine continuity, that God had planted seeds of justice in human societies long before revelation on Sinai or in Arabia. Whatever the conclusion, one thing was clear: Hammurabi's code had forced us to rethink the origins of law itself. Today, Hammurabi's legacy lives on in subtle but powerful ways. His image is carved among history's great lawgivers in the halls of government. Replicas of his stele stand in institutions like the United Nations, reminders of humanity's ancient pursuit of justice. Even the phrase "eye for an eye" remains part of our vocabulary, debated by philosophers, judges, and ordinary people as they wrestle with the balance between punishment and mercy. What makes Hammurabi's code remarkable is not that it was perfect, it was far from it, but that it was an early attempt to put the law above the whim of rulers. It declared that even kings must write down the rules, that society should be guided by principle rather than personal vengeance. In that sense, Hammurabi set humanity on a path that leads all the way to our modern ideals of justice and human rights. For believers, Hammurabi's story carries deeper meaning. The Bible says, "Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream." The Quran commands, Stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to God, even against yourselves. The Torah commands, "You shall not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in Egypt." Across different revelations, the message remains the same. Justice is sacred. Hammurabi's code, though imperfect, was part of humanity's first great struggle to embody that sacred calling. Standing before the black stela today, you can almost hear Hammurabi's voice echoing through the ages. To prevent the strong from oppressing the weak, to protect the widow and the orphan, to uphold order in the land. It is a reminder that civilizations rise and fall, empires crumble, but the quest for justice endures. From Babylon to Sinai, from Medina to the modern courtroom, the dream remains unchanged. That the law can be a shield for the powerless, a boundary for the powerful, and a reflection of the divine order that calls all of us to do what is right.